Welcome to The Adventure of the Iron Prayer, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, The Eastern Enigma, Tales from the Great Hiatus, playing in the year 1891. Long after the world believed him lost at Reichenbach, Sherlock Holmes was very much alive. I discovered the proof only recently, within a hidden compartment of his old travel trunk, journals penned in a complex cipher. With Mycroft's help, I have at last decoded these accounts from his great hiatus, tales of his journey through the enigmatic East, where he faced challenges that tested not only his logic, but his very soul. The first of these decoded adventures takes us to the treacherous peaks of the Himalayas. From his journal, I present to you the singular case he called The Adventure of the Iron Prayer. Chapter 1. Even now, years later, and an ocean away, I have only to close my eyes to hear the fury of that Himalayan tempest. It was a storm of a different order than our London fogs, a raw and elemental power that sought to tear our sanctuary from its perch on the cliffside. The wind did not so much howl as scream through the rock-hewn passages of Paro Taksang, a physical pressure against the ears. With each fresh peal of thunder, the granite beneath my feet seemed to shudder, and the very air grew thin and sharp with the metallic tang of ozone, as if the sky itself were a vast electrical machine. In such moments of celestial violence, the abbot Lobsang had a most predictable custom. He was a man of rigid habit and few admirers. His rule over the monastery marked by a severity that bordered on cruelty. Yet his piety, or perhaps his fear, was absolute. At the first sign of a major storm, he would retreat to his meditation cell, a windowless chamber carved directly from the mountain's heart, its single heavy door of iron-banded timber the only breach in its stone shell. There he would remain, locked in prayer, until the heavens fell silent once more. It was a routine known to every soul in this high and lonely place. The storm reached its crescendo near midnight. A flash of lightning illuminated the monastery with a ghastly blue-white glare that seemed to last for several seconds, followed not by a rumble, but by a singular, explosive crack. It was a sound so immediate and violent that it felt as though the mountain itself had been smote in two. Then an unnatural quiet descended, broken only by the hiss of rain against stone and the distant, retreating growl of thunder. A strange, acrid scent, more potent than before, a sharp, metallic tang of burnt air, and something far fouler, drifted through the corridors. It was an hour before the younger monks, their duties complete, approached the abbot's cell. They found the heavy door slightly ajar, its iron bolt thrown back. A wisp of dark smoke curled from the opening, carrying a foul odor of burnt wool, and something else, something sickeningly familiar. A hushed reverence fell over them as they peered inside. The abbot was there, seated upon his meditation mat, yet he was transformed into a blackened, skeletal ruin. The stone walls around him were scorched, and the air within was thick and difficult to breathe. A single word passed from monk to monk, a whisper of awe and terror: judgment. The night passed slowly, filled with hushed speculation and fearful prayers. By morning, the sky was a placid, washed-out blue. I stood with my mentor, Khempo Rinpoche, on a balcony overlooking the valley. His ancient face was impassive, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a deep and troubled light. The monastery below us buzzed with the news, the monks speaking in hushed, reverent tones of the miracle. His voice was as calm and steady as the mountain itself.
"They say a dragon of fire descended from the heavens to strike down a wicked man. They see it as a sign, a divine cleansing of this sacred place," replied Khempo Rinpoche. "I watched a hawk circle on the updrafts below, my mind already wrestling with the stark impossibilities of the scene described to me. A man incinerated, yet no fire, no exit, no earthly explanation." I stated, my own voice quiet but precise.
"A sealed room of solid granite. No chimney, no window. A man incinerated by a force that left the stone itself merely scorched. It is a formidable problem," explained Sherlock Holmes. He replied, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "It is more than a problem, my friend Sigerson. To them it is an answer, an article of faith. But faith, when it serves the ambitions of men, can be a dangerous thing. The heavens are vast and mysterious, but the hearts of men can be known." Khempo Rinpoche replied. He turned his full gaze upon me, his expression one of profound gravity. "They see the hand of heaven in that cell. I ask you to find the hand of man," answered Khempo Rinpoche. Holmes would later recount the events of that morning with a startling precision. His words transported me from our Baker Street rooms directly to that high, frozen sanctuary. He followed a young, silent acolyte down a corridor hewn from the living rock of the mountain itself. The only sounds were the soft slap of their felt-soled boots upon the stone, and the distant, mournful cry of the wind as it whipped past the monastery's outer walls. The air grew colder, and a peculiar scent, metallic and sharp, pricked at his nostrils. The acolyte stopped before a heavy door of iron-banded timber, its surface bare of any handle or lock on the exterior. With a shared effort, he and another monk slid the heavy bolt from its housing, the groan of protesting wood echoing in the narrow passage. As the door swung inward, revealing a cavern of absolute blackness, the strange, clean odor intensified. It was the smell of a lightning strike, of raw power unleashed. Stepping across the threshold, lamp held high, Holmes found himself in a chamber that was less a room and more a tomb. It was a perfect cube, perhaps 10 feet to a side, and his immediate sweeping glance confirmed the monk's claim. It was seamless. The walls, floor, and ceiling were of the same continuous, mottled granite, polished smooth by generations of hands. There were no windows, no chimney, not so much as a crack to admit a wisp of smoke or a single draught of air. It was, in every sense of the term, a sealed room. In the center of the floor were the remains. There was no pyre, no sign of any combustible material, save for the scorched fragments of a woolen robe. What was left of the abbot was a blackened, brittle shape, a ghastly sculpture of carbon. But it was the pattern of the destruction that immediately arrested Holmes's attention. A dark, spidery tracery of burns radiated across the stone floor from the body, like a frozen photograph of the lightning bolt itself. Holmes knelt, his keen eyes tracing the path of the discharge, his long fingers hovering just above the stone as if to feel some lingering energy. He rose slowly.
his mind a whirring engine of observation and inference. He took a long, deliberate breath, analyzing the lingering scent of ozone. He spoke then, his voice a low, resonant murmur, directed more to the silent, watchful chamber than to the monks at the door. No soot, no evidence of a conventional flame. This was not a fire. It was a discharge, a singular, catastrophic release of electrical force. Sherlock Holmes responded. He paced the small confines of the cell, the sound of his steps unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. He ran a hand along the cold, unyielding granite, searching for any artifice, any cleverly disguised wire or metallic vein. He found nothing. The room was a fortress of solid stone, seemingly impenetrable to any force, natural or otherwise. And yet, in that moment of absolute impossibility, Holmes felt no despair. As he later recounted, what he experienced was a familiar and exhilarating thrill. It was the spark that ignited his singular genius. Faced with a miracle, he saw only a magnificent problem. Its sheer insolubility was a gauntlet thrown down, a direct challenge to the laws of logic he held so dear. A faint smile touched his lips, a sight that must have greatly unsettled his pious guides. The divine hand may be invisible, but the hand of man, however clever, must always leave a trace. The question is not how the lightning entered this sanctum. He paused, turning to face the doorway, his grey eyes alight with a fire that seemed to rival the storm's. His voice sharpened, acquiring the incisive edge I knew so well. It is, rather, how it was invited in. To solve that, I must first understand the man who was struck down, and those who knelt in his shadow. The intellectual fire kindled in Holmes's eyes within that granite cell seemed only to burn brighter in the cold, thin air of the monastery courtyard. He stood for a moment, a tall, gaunt figure in his traveller's garb, his gaze sweeping over the wind-swept expanse before settling upon a pair of monks mending a nearby stone wall. The rhythmic flapping of countless prayer flags, a sound like a flock of frantic birds, was the only constant noise against the ceaseless moan of the wind through the mountain passes. His voice was low, yet it cut through the din with its usual precision. Observe, my dear fellow, not grief, but relief. It is etched upon every face, hidden in every downcast eye, observed Sherlock Holmes. As we approached them, Holmes offered a respectful bow, the inquisitive scholar Sigerson perfectly maintained. He spoke to them in their own tongue, his tone one of solemn commiseration regarding the loss of their abbot. Though I could not follow the intricacies of the language, I am a student of men, and I saw precisely what Holmes had meant. One monk muttered a response, his gaze fixed firmly upon the stone in his hands. The other merely nodded, his lips a thin, tight line. There was no sorrow in their posture. Their piety was a mask for a sentiment far less charitable, a truth that radiated from them in their guarded silence. As we turned away, a new figure approached us, moving with a confident stride that set him apart from the others. He was younger, with a broad, intelligent face and eyes that held a keen, calculating light. This, I knew at once, must be the successor. He spoke in measured, almost perfect English, his voice a smooth and resonant baritone. "You are the visitors from the west. I am Lama Dorje. "It is a dark time for our sanctuary. The heavens have spoken with a terrible voice," Lama Dorje answered. "A profound tragedy," Holmes replied, his tone impeccably neutral. "To be chosen for such a fate suggests a man of great spiritual importance," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A flicker of something, was it irony, passed through Dorje's eyes before being extinguished. He inclined his head in a gesture of pious agreement. The abbot's devotion was absolute. He held fast to the most rigid of our traditions. The divine will is a mystery we are not meant to unravel, only to accept, responded Lama Dorje. He offered to show us the monastery's famed scriptorium, an offer Holmes readily accepted. We followed him into a long, low-ceilinged chamber, the air thick with the scent of yak butter lamps and ancient parchment. Here the howl of the wind was replaced by a reverent hush, broken only by the soft scratch of reed pens and the rustle of turning pages. As Lama Dorje was explaining the provenance of a particular scroll, an elderly monk shuffled past, his arms laden with books. Holmes turned to the old man, his voice casual. "Your new abbot is a man of great learning, I see, a worthy custodian of this magnificent library," observed Sherlock Holmes. The old monk looked towards Lama Dorje with an expression of deep respect, yet his reply held an unintended resonance. He answered in a hushed, reedy voice, "Indeed, sir, his knowledge is vast. He honours the ancient texts, of course, but his private studies are most unconventional," replied monk. The word hung in the silent air. Lama Dorje's smile did not falter, but I saw his posture stiffen almost imperceptibly. He quickly thanked the old monk, who bowed and shuffled on his way. I glanced at Holmes. His face was a placid mask, but I knew him too well. That single, carelessly spoken word was to him what a scent is to a bloodhound. It was, I knew, the beginning of the trail. He turned back to Dorje, his own smile disarmingly academic. "Unconventional studies, how fascinating! In a place so dedicated to preserving ancient wisdom, new avenues of thought must be a rare treasure indeed. I should very much like to discuss matters of philosophy with you when you have the time," declared Sherlock Holmes. Following the monk's remark on Lama Dorje's unconventional studies, Holmes contrived a meeting within the monastery's library. The chamber was a cavern of silence, broken only by the whisper of our footsteps across the stone floor and the faint, dry rustle of ancient scrolls. The air, thick with the scent of aged parchment and yak butter lamps, offered a scholarly contrast to the lingering memory of ozone and tempest. Lama Dorje met us there, his saffron robes a vibrant splash of colour against the dusty gloom. He moved with a quiet grace, his face a mask of serene piety that concealed, I was certain, a formidable intellect. My friend began, his voice, as the humble Sigerson, perfectly pitched. "It is a place of great wisdom, Lama. One feels the weight of ages. Tell me, in your philosophy, how do you reconcile the will of the heavens with the immutable laws that govern the very rock beneath our feet? The laws of the earth are but one instrument of the heavens, Sigerson. The divine speaks through the storm, through the fire, and through the stone itself. One does not contradict the other. One illuminates it." The two men engaged in a mesmerizing verbal duel, a dance of philosophy and faith. Holmes, with his relentless logic, probed the edges of the Lama's beliefs.
whilst Dorje parried each thrust with elegant scriptural deflections. My friend then steered the conversation with the subtlety of a master angler towards the very structure of the monastery. This fortress of faith, carved from the mountain's heart, is a testament to such belief. The late abbot's cell, I am told, was hewn from the purest granite, a formidable choice. This fortress of faith, carved from the mountain's heart, is a testament to such belief. The late abbot's cell, I am told, was hewn from the purest granite, a formidable choice. Indeed, the entire lamasery is built upon a most stable igneous intrusion. It provides a foundation impervious to all but the most direct heavenly command, remarked Lama Dorje. The phrase, so precise and jarringly scientific, hung in the still air. Igneous intrusion. It meant little to me, but I saw Holmes's posture stiffen almost imperceptibly, his attention sharpening to a razor's edge. The hunter had heard the snap of a twig. My friend's voice betrayed nothing but polite curiosity. "A fascinating term. You have a scholar's gift for description, Lama," declared Sherlock Holmes. Dorje's serene mask ruffled for an instant, and he gave a slight dismissive wave before guiding the conversation to safer spiritual ground. Soon after, he excused himself, leaving us alone amidst the silent towers of scrolls. For a long moment, Holmes stood motionless, his gaze distant. Then, with sudden cat-like swiftness, he crossed to a dark alcove at the library's far end. He ran his fingers along a row of incongruous texts. Stiff, cloth-bound volumes nestled amongst the softer scrolls. He pulled one free with a soft scrape. It was a heavy, dark green book, its cover embossed with English lettering. His voice was a low, triumphant murmur, barely containing the thrill of discovery. When a man uses a term like igneous intrusion, Watson, he is not quoting scripture. He is quoting a textbook, Sherlock Holmes noted. He opened the cover. On the flyleaf, in faded brown ink, was a dedication in a fine European hand. I leaned closer to read the inscription, illuminated by a single shaft of dusty light. It read, "To my keenest student, Dorje, may you survey the world with new eyes. H. Abernathy, formerly of the Royal Survey." The name Abernathy resonated in the profound quiet of the library. The source of the knowledge now had a name. The unconventional studies are unconventional only for a Tibetan Lama. For a student of a British surveyor, they are merely rudimentary. He closed the book with a quiet, definitive snap. His eyes shifted from the volume to the high slit window, his gaze fixing on the forbidding cliff face outside. "We have found the source of the knowledge. Now we must find the instrument of its application," declared Sherlock Holmes. The account of what followed, Holmes related to me many months later, back in the familiar, comfortable clutter of our Baker Street rooms. Yet, as he spoke, the scent of London fog was replaced in my imagination by the biting, thin air of the Himalayas. Having left the library and the unsettling presence of Lama Dorje, he found the very confines of the monastery walls to be intolerable. The puzzle of the abbot's demise was not to be solved by poring over ancient texts, but by examining the very rock from which they were hewn. The answer, he was convinced, lay not within the sealed cell, but somewhere outside it. He therefore pulled his heavy woolen robe tighter and stepped out into the wind's assault. The storm had passed, but its ghost remained, whipping down the corridors of stone with a mournful howl. Holmes ventured upon a narrow, treacherous path he had noted earlier, a mere lip of granite that wound its way around the cliff face towards the monastery's roof. Each footstep was a calculated risk, the stone still slick with moisture. Far below, the valley was a swirl of mist, and the only sounds were the shriek of the wind and the grating of his leather boots against the rock. It was here, he told me, suspended between the heavens and the earth, that the true nature of the crime became clear to him. Nature, in its raw and untamed fury, could be a terrifying thing. Yet it was predictable, governed by laws as immutable as gravity. The mind that had harnessed such a force, directing it with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, was something altogether more formidable. This was not a crime of passion, it was a crime of intellect, a deadly theorem proven upon a man's flesh. He reached a broader ledge directly above the section of the cliff which held the late abbot's cell. From this vantage, he could see the source of the incessant noise that had been the backdrop to his investigation. A forest of prayer flags, hundreds of them, strung on ropes and anchored to the rock. They thrashed and snapped in the gale, a frantic chorus of colour and sound. It was a chaotic spectacle, yet Holmes's mind, ever seeking order, began its work of dissection. He moved amongst the lines, his gloved fingers tracing each rope from its anchor point. Most were of a coarse, traditional hemp, frayed by the elements and stained by time. They were slack, giving themselves to the will of the wind. But then his eyes, which missed nothing, were arrested by a single line. It was at once different from its fellows, thinner for one, and possessed of a darker, almost metallic sheen. He grasped it. Where the others were yielding, this one was stretched taut, humming with a tension that defied the storm. It felt new, its fibres smooth and uniform beneath his touch. His voice, he recalled, was a low murmur, nearly lost to the wind. "So, this is your thread, Lama Dorje. Not a prayer sent to the heavens, but a wire intended to draw the heavens down," Sherlock Holmes said. Following this unnatural thread with his gaze, he saw it led from a high, exposed pinnacle of rock, across the roof, and disappeared into a cluster of older, thicker ropes directly above the abbot's cell. An artery of artificial lightning. The discovery was immense, a key turning in a lock he had not yet fully perceived. The external mechanism was found. Now he must uncover how its terrible purpose was delivered through solid stone. His mind ablaze with this new certainty, Holmes turned from the howling wind and the frantic flags, his steps sure-footed and swift as he began the descent back towards the silent, sealed cell. The memory of that taut, unfamiliar rope amongst the prayer flags was a burning coal in Holmes's mind. He had descended from the treacherous cliff face with a renewed, almost feral intensity. Leaving me with Khempo Rinpoche, he returned alone to the scene of the supposed miracle, his long strides echoing a sharp, decisive rhythm against the monastery stones. The heavy granite door of the abbot's cell groaned open and scraped shut behind him, plunging him once more into that cold, silent darkness, a tomb thick with the lingering scent of ozone and scorched wool. He later recounted to me the precise sequence of his thoughts in that profound stillness. The chamber was a perfect granite box, a fortress against man. But the new rope, positioned directly above, argued for an assault not by man, but by nature, harnessed by a human hand. The killer had made the heavens themselves the murder weapon. Therefore, the fortress must have a flaw, a secret gate not of its own making. His lantern cast a pool of trembling yellow light, pushing back the oppressive shadows. He ignored the scorched floor and the simple cot. His gaze was fixed upwards. He paced the confines of the small room, the soft scuff of his boots, the only sound to break the funereal quiet. He swept the beam of light across the ceiling, inch by painstaking inch, searching for some imperfection, some sign of tampering. The granite was immense, implacable, a solid ceiling of rock that seemed to mock his efforts. Then, from his coat, he produced his powerful pocket lens. The metallic click of its case opening was a sharp retort in the dead air. Holding the lantern high in one hand, he raised the lens with the other, his entire being focused upon that small circle of magnified stone. He began his search anew, scrutinizing the rock with a concentration so profound it was a physical force. It was a task that would have exhausted the patience of any other man, but Holmes's patience, when on the scent of a mystery, was truly limitless. And then he found it. It was a thing so minuscule, so utterly insignificant, that 1,000 men might have looked upon it and seen nothing. A hairline fracture, no thicker than a strand of spider silk, zigzagged for a mere 2 inches before vanishing back into the solid grey mass. It was not a chisel mark, nor a drill hole. It was a natural flaw, a geological accident, a tiny fissure in the firmament of the abbot's sealed world. In that instant, as Holmes told it, the entire diabolical ingenuity of the crime was laid bare before his mind's eye. This was not the work of a moment. This was the culmination of years. He pictured Lama Dorje, armed with the disgraced surveyor's knowledge, assiduously studying the cliff face. He imagined him, under the guise of meditation or repair, mapping every crack and seam, not to mend them, but to find the one perfect, hidden conduit that led from the open sky to the heart of his rival's sanctum. It was the sheer, cold-blooded patience of the man, Watson, he explained to me later, his voice a low thrum of grim admiration. He did not force a path, he simply found the one that God had already made, and turned it to the devil's purpose, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The lightning had not struck at random. It had been invited, guided down that new, taut rope to this precise, pre-selected point, where it could breach the stone and find its target. The fissure was the keyhole. But a keyhole requires a key. His theory was incomplete. A path had been forged to the cell, but what, inside this stone chamber, had drawn the fire to the man himself? Holmes lowered his lens, the chain of his logic now demanding its final, crucial link. His sharp grey eyes swept away from the ceiling and fell upon the victim's few earthly possessions, resting on a small, crude table. A bowl, a book, and a string of prayer beads. Though I was not present for this singular examination, Holmes later recounted the events to me with such precision that I can see the scene as if through his own eyes. Having established the fissure in the granite as the point of entry for the celestial fire, he turned his attention from the vessel of the crime to the meagre effects of the man who had occupied it.
He was led to a small, cold chamber, little more than a stone cupboard, where the late abbot's worldly possessions had been stored. The air was still, and smelt of incense and the dry dust of ages. The only sound was the soft scrape of his boots upon the flagstones as he entered.
There was little to inspect. A saffron robe, folded with care, a single wooden bowl, worn smooth by years of use, a scroll of sacred texts. Holmes handled each item with a delicate reverence that belied the analytical fire in his eyes. He ran his fingers over the coarse weave of the robe, lifted the bowl, noting its surprising lightness. His movements were methodical, his focus absolute. Then his gaze fell upon the final object, coiled neatly upon a small ledge carved from the rock. It was the abbot's mala, his prayer beads. He lifted the string, and it was here that his impassive mask first showed a flicker of profound interest. He let the beads fall from one palm to the other, a motion that produced not the expected light, dry clatter of wood or bone, but a low, dense thud, a sound with more substance, more gravity, that seemed strangely out of place in the silent room. He closed his hand around them, and a frown creased his brow. They were cold, not the ambient chill of the stone chamber, but a deeper, more persistent cold that spoke of a material with a high capacity for drawing heat.
108 beads, carved to resemble sandalwood, I should think. The traditional choice for a man of his station, Sherlock Holmes noted. He held them suspended, a long, dark rosary against the grey stone. They did not move with the lightness of wooden prayer beads. Instead, they hung with the severe, unyielding drape of a fine jeweller's chain. The incongruity was a jarring note in an otherwise stark and simple scene. He placed the string upon the stone shelf, and the sound it made was not a clink, but a heavy, solid report that echoed faintly in the confined space. And yet, sandalwood does not possess such a density, nor does yak bone. I have handled countless artifacts from the East, and my fingers know the weight and warmth of every conceivable material. This is an anomaly, stated Sherlock Holmes. He traced a single bead with his index finger, his mind rapidly cross-referencing the sensory data, the weight in his palm, the thermal conductivity against his skin, the acoustic properties of their impact against his vast internal catalogue of knowledge. Every test his senses could apply screamed the same conclusion. The deception was as elegant as it was diabolical. The specific gravity is entirely wrong. The weight is consistent not with prayer, but with purpose. These are no mere aids to meditation. They are a tool, a conductor disguised as an object of devotion, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He picked up the string of beads once more, his grip now firm and decisive. The faint light from the corridor caught the polished surface of the dark spheres, but to Holmes they no longer represented piety. They represented a cold, calculated mechanism, the missing link between the fissure in the heavens and the incinerated man on the floor. What lay beneath that deceptively simple wooden veneer was now the paramount question, a question he intended to answer without delay. Within the cold stone confines of our modest quarters, a profound silence reigned, broken only by the faint, rhythmic scrape of metal against wood.
The singular flame of a butter lamp threw Holmes's hawkish features into sharp relief, his brow furrowed in a display of concentration so absolute it seemed the world outside our heavy door had ceased to exist. Upon a rough-hewn table before him lay the abbot's rosary, its dark beads coiled like a dormant serpent. In his hand, Holmes held his smallest penknife, the tool moving with the delicate precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You recall my observation, Watson, the unnatural density. A rosary of wood or bone, even of the densest ironwood, would not possess such a heft. There is a deception here, one of weight and substance," explained Sherlock Holmes. I watched, transfixed, as he applied steady pressure to the seam of a single bead. There was no crude cracking, but rather a slow, deliberate parting of a near-invisible line. A tiny sliver of dark, polished wood curled away from the blade, falling to the stone floor with a whisper. Beneath it, the lamplight caught a gleam of something wholly unexpected, not the pale interior of carved wood, but the unmistakable ruddy glint of metal. "Good heavens, Holmes," I breathed, leaning closer. "Is that copper?" commented Dr. John Watson. "Solid copper," he confirmed, his tone a curious blend of clinical satisfaction and grudging admiration. He nudged the wooden shell with his knife tip, revealing it to be a mere veneer, expertly hollowed and fitted. Each bead is a dense sphere of the metal, drilled through and encased in this wooden masquerade. The cord upon which they are strung is not hemp, but a fine, tightly wound copper wire, insulated by a silken thread. This is not an instrument of prayer, my dear fellow. It is a Leyden jar in miniature, a potent electrical conductor designed to look like an object of piety, Sherlock Holmes noted. He set down his knife and held up the dissected bead between his thumb and forefinger, rotating it in the flickering light. A rare expression crossed his face, the look of a master craftsman appraising the work of an equal. He saw not a tool of murder, but a marvel of illicit engineering. Consider the logistics, Watson. To acquire such a quantity of refined copper in this remote fastness is a feat in itself. It speaks of a connection to the outside world, a rare trade caravan perhaps, or the forgotten effects of some long-departed European surveyor. Then the tools to shape it, the skill to craft these wooden casings with such perfection that they would fool all but the most sensitive touch, and all of this accomplished in absolute secrecy. Our murderer is no common brute. He is an artist of a very high and terrible order, Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes fell silent, his mind clearly racing through the chain of possibilities. He placed the two halves of the bead upon the table as if they were pieces on a chessboard. His gaze drifted from the evidence before us, moving past me towards the narrow, unglazed window slit that looked out upon the monastery courtyard. Through it, the distant sound of a prayer flag, caught by the high mountain wind, could be heard as a low, persistent flapping. "A conductor is useless, Watson, without a point to gather the charge. The serpent has a tail, which lay coiled in the abbot's very hands. Now we must find its head." In his later recounting of the affair, Holmes described to me the profound stillness of the monastery roof in the hour before dawn. The air, thin and bitingly cold, carried the scent of stone and distant snow. Above him, the velvet black of the sky was shot through with stars so brilliant they seemed almost within reach. He moved with a silent, deliberate grace, a movement that belied the heavy robes he wore. His footsteps made no sound upon the wind-swept granite slabs above the unfortunate abbot's final chamber. The wind, ever present at this altitude, whispered and sighed through the forest of prayer flags. They flapped with a sound like the rustling of 1,000 dry leaves, providing cover for his delicate work. He approached the central mast from which the offending rope was strung. It was the very line that led from the roof's peak directly towards the ventilation shaft of the cell below. The rope was taut, humming with a low tension in the ceaseless draught. With the deftness of a seasoned mariner, he worked at the knot. The yak hair fibres were stiff with ice and friction, but his fingers, patient and strong, persuaded the knot to yield. A final creak of protest from the fibres, and the rope came free in his hands. He coiled it quickly and retreated to the shelter of a low parapet, crouching to escape the worst of the wind's chill breath. From a hidden pocket he produced a small but powerful lens. The moon, a sliver of silver, offered just enough light for his examination. He held a section of the rope close, his breath misting in the frigid air. To the casual observer, it was a common, coarse rope spun from yak hair, its texture rough and uneven. But Holmes was no casual observer. His trained fingers had already telegraphed a message to his brain. A subtle, unnatural rigidity lay within the cordage. He told me later that a grim smile touched his lips as he murmured to the stars, "The thread of the argument, Watson, is the thread of the rope itself," Sherlock Holmes noted. He brought the lens to his eye, and the secret of the rope was laid bare. Woven with diabolical skill, almost invisible amongst the coarse animal hairs, was a single fine metallic filament. It was not crudely inserted, but was an integral part of the spin, following the twist of the fibres with meticulous precision. As he rotated the rope, this tiny metal vein caught the faint moonlight, betraying itself with a brief, cold glimmer. Here was the proof. This was no local product. Such wire, drawn so perfectly thin, spoke of European industry. It was a twin in character to the copper cores of the prayer beads. The murderer was not merely a clever monk. He was a man with access to materials utterly foreign to this remote sanctuary. The logistical effort, the sheer audacity of smuggling such items and then crafting them into the murder weapon was staggering. And in that moment, crouched on the frozen roof, the crime assembled itself in his mind. It possessed the beautiful, irrefutable logic of a scientific diagram. The abbot's trident at the highest point was no mere ornament. It was a lightning rod. This rope, a disguised conductor, channeled the celestial power downwards. The prayer beads, with their hidden copper wire, carried the charge from the wall to the victim's hand. The storm was not an instrument of God's wrath, but of man's. It had been invited, guided, and delivered with the precision of an assassin's bullet. He had solved the mechanics of the iron prayer. A quiet, fierce satisfaction settled over him, a feeling I knew well. The physical puzzle was complete. Yet, as he coiled the damning rope and concealed it within his robes, a far more complex question presented itself. Who, in this citadel of faith, possessed the mind of a physicist and the soul of a murderer?
With the slender, damnable thread secured within my journal, Holmes led me not to our quarters, but to the private study of Khempo Rinpoche. The air inside was still, thick with the scent of yak butter lamps and ancient parchment. From a distant hall drifted a low, rhythmic chant, a sound as constant as the wind moaning against the stone. Rinpoche sat cross-legged on a cushion, his placid gaze fixed upon my friend, who assumed a posture of quiet respect.
Such a filament, respected one, speaks not of mountain craft, but of a mind familiar with the sciences of the West, Sherlock Holmes said. Khempo Rinpoche nodded slowly, the light from a nearby lamp catching the deep lines of his face. His voice, when it came, was as smooth and worn as a river stone. "The world is larger than our peaks, Sigerson. We have had visitors," Khempo Rinpoche replied. "Indeed, but I do not speak of a passing traveller. I speak of a teacher. To manipulate the very fabric of a storm requires more than a casual understanding. Has there ever been a man of Europe who stayed for a time, one who, perhaps having fallen from grace in his own world, sought refuge in ours?" stated Sherlock Holmes. My friend's question was crafted with surgical precision, designed to guide memory rather than demand an answer. The old Lama's eyes unfocused for a moment, drifting back through the years. A faint rustle of his saffron robe was the only sound in the chamber. "There was one, many years ago, an Englishman, a surveyor for your government, Abernathy. He was disgraced, they said, a scandal involving maps and money. He came here broken, seeking not enlightenment, but escape," responded Khempo Rinpoche. "And did any of your acolytes show a particular interest in this broken man's knowledge? A young, ambitious mind, perhaps, eager to learn of the world beyond these valleys," explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's tone was gentle, yet possessed a piercing insistence that was impossible to ignore. Rinpoche's gaze sharpened, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. He was a bitter man, this Abernathy, but his mind was sharp. He spoke of harnessing rivers, of the sparks that leap between clouds, and yes, there was a student. Young, clever, always asking questions the rest of us did not think to ask. He spent many hours with the surveyor. It was Lama Dorje, said Khempo Rinpoche. The name fell into the quiet room with the weight of a final judgment. Holmes gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. His trap sprung. He had not accused, merely illuminated a path that Rinpoche himself had walked. A man of science seldom travels without his tools, his books, his instruments. When this Mr. Abernathy finally departed this world, what became of his worldly possessions? Declared Sherlock Holmes. He left little of value, some worn clothes, a few books of strange diagrams, save for a heavy sea chest filled with instruments of brass, coils of copper wire, and strange glass jars. Lama Dorje claimed it as his inheritance, being the man's only true pupil, and it has been in his private stores ever since, remarked Khempo Rinpoche. There it was, the source, the means, the final link in a chain stretching from a disgraced English surveyor to the incinerated abbot. A cold certainty settled in the room, chasing the warmth from the butter lamps. Holmes rose, his movements fluid and precise, and offered a respectful bow. "You have my deepest gratitude, Khempo Rinpoche. You have confirmed the final piece of this most terrestrial puzzle.
Sherlock Holmes responded. As we walked back through the darkened, echoing corridors, the wind howled with a new, knowing voice. Upon Holmes's face I saw not triumph, but the grim, weary look of a physician who has diagnosed a terminal malady. He understood the anatomy of the crime. All that remained was the terrible presentation of his findings. The brazier in Sigerson's quarters threw dancing shadows upon the rough stone walls, its small glowing circle of warmth a stark contrast to the immense chilling silence of the monastery. The wind, a constant presence at this altitude, moaned a low dirge through the high passes. Khempo Rinpoche sat opposite my friend, his posture one of serene stillness, yet his eyes held a profound and searching quality. The matter of the surveyor's chest lay settled between us, a final grim piece of a puzzle I was only just beginning to comprehend. The fire is a simple thing. It seeks fuel, it gives heat. Lightning, Rinpoche, is no different. It is merely fire of a grander and more immediate sort. It, too, seeks a path, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes spoke with a quiet intensity, his voice devoid of its usual London sharpness, adapted instead to the resonant quiet of the room. He leaned forward, his long fingers steepled before him. The path of heaven is not for man to draw. The abbot was struck down in a sealed cell of solid granite. A judgment, the brothers say. How could a man's hand reach through solid rock? Responded Khempo Rinpoche. It did not need to. The hand in question did its work long before the storm ever gathered. It used the mountain itself. Tell me, Rinpoche, you know the abbot's cell well, do you not? Is there not a fissure, a thin, dark line of quartz running from ceiling to floor in the far corner? Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The old Lama's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. It was a detail so minor, so much a part of the natural stone, that I imagined few had ever paid it any mind. There is a flaw in the stone, known since the cell was first carved. It weeps with moisture in the wet season, remarked Khempo Rinpoche. Precisely. It weeps because it provides a channel to the earth. Now, consider the late abbot's prayer rope. A gift, I believe, from Lama Dorje. It was woven with a most unusually lustrous thread. That thread, Rinpoche, was fine copper wire, drawn from the spools left by your disgraced surveyor, replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's explanation unfolded into the profound silence of the room, each fact a carefully placed stone in a logical arch. Only the low crackle of the coals in the brazier dared to break the stillness. The wire, it would make the rope a conductor, said Khempo Rinpoche. An excellent one. The abbot had a ritual, did he not? During any great storm, he would retreat to his cell and pray, holding that very rope. Our killer needed only to complete the circuit. He pushed one end of the metallic rope deep into the damp fissure, grounding it. The other end he arranged carefully, so its heavy, modified beads touched the iron grill of the ventilation shaft. This grill, you understand, was high on the outer wall, declared Sherlock Holmes. The entire monstrous apparatus became horribly clear in my mind. A trap set not with springs and jaws, but with geology and ritual. When the storm broke, the heavens did the rest. The lightning sought the highest point, that iron grill. It was then given an irresistible path, down the wire, through the abbot, and harmlessly into the earth. This was not divine judgment, Rinpoche. It was an execution by physics, calculated to a terrible nicety. He finished, and the intellectual fire in his voice was banked, replaced by something else. The cold satisfaction of the solution was overshadowed by a heavy sorrow for the profanity of the act. To use a sacred object as a weapon, to turn a ritual of faith into the mechanism of murder, it is a defilement beyond comprehension. "You are certain it was Lama Dorje?" answered Khempo Rinpoche. "The profanity of the act is matched only by the certainty of the logic. He was the surveyor's only true pupil. He had the knowledge, the materials from the chest, and he gave the gift of the prayer rope. The chain is complete and unbreakable," replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes stood, his tall frame casting a long, sharp shadow that reached across the room to touch the feet of the seated Lama. The time for theory was over. His face was set like granite, his eyes holding a familiar, dangerous light. "And now, if I have your leave, the time has come to present this chain to the man who forged it," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The monastery library was a chamber of profound, cold silence, a quietude broken only by the whisper of a lingering wind and the soft, intermittent sputter of butter lamps. Their warm, flickering glow cast dancing shadows upon towering shelves of ancient scrolls, and the air was thick with the scent of aged parchment, melting yak butter, and the faint, sweet spice of incense. Khempo Rinpoche sat upon a low cushion, his hands folded in his lap, a figure of absolute stillness. Before him, my friend Holmes, or Sigerson as he was known here, had arranged several objects upon a low, dark wood table. I stood a pace behind, my own heart thumping a nervous rhythm, a drumbeat against my ribs. The heavy wooden door groaned open, admitting a brief, chilling draught that made the lamp flames dance. Lama Dorje entered, closing it behind him with a soft thud that sealed us within the quiet. He moved with a practised grace, his saffron robes rustling like dry leaves against the stone floor. His face was a mask of serene piety, though I fancied I saw a flicker of sharp appraisal in his eyes as he took in our small assembly. His voice was low and resonant, filling the room without effort. "Be seated, Dorje. Sigerson has concluded his inquiries," replied Khempo Rinpoche. Dorje inclined his head and settled opposite Holmes, his composure immaculate. My friend leaned forward, his long fingers gesturing towards a coil of rope on the table. "A fascinating weave," Holmes began, his tone conversational, yet carrying an edge as sharp as a razor. "The late abbot used this rope for his meditations during storms, did he not? A tradition to feel connected to the sky's fury," stated Sherlock Holmes. "It was his way," Dorje replied, his voice smooth as polished stone. "A path to understanding the impermanence of all things," replied Lama Dorje. Holmes picked up the rope, letting the rough fibres whisper through his fingers. The lamplight caught a faint metallic glint I had not noticed before, a single thread of unnatural light within the organic weave. Indeed, and to aid that connection, a very fine strand of copper wire was woven into its core. An unusual addition for a sacred object, would you not agree? It makes the rope a most excellent conductor of natural energy," remarked Sherlock Holmes. A muscle in Dorje's jaw tightened. For the first time, a fissure appeared in his serene facade. He remained silent. Holmes then nudged a string of prayer beads with his forefinger, and they clattered softly, a stark sound in the hushed library, against the dark wood.
Then we have these, 108 beads, polished smooth by countless prayers, all of yak bone, save for one. He isolated a single darker bead, its surface rough and cold-looking compared to the others, and held it up. This one is iron, hollowed out and filled with salt and charcoal. It was this bead the abbot was instructed to press against the granite wall, a wall which, at that precise spot, contains a rich vein of metallic ore running directly to the cliff's peak.
The colour had drained from Lama Dorje's face, leaving it a waxy, sallow shade in the lamplight. A fine sheen of sweat glistened on his brow. His breathing had become shallow, a sharp, rasping sound audible in the oppressive quiet of the library. "These are strange fantasies," he said, his voice losing its melodious quality, becoming thin and strained. "The fabrications of an outsider who does not understand our ways," said Lama Dorje.
"There is no fantasy in a Leyden jar, nor in the principles of voltaic electricity, subjects I find discussed at length in a certain English surveyor's notebooks," Holmes pressed on, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet each word landed like a hammer blow. "Notebooks which I found concealed beneath a loose floor stone in your own cell. You did not merely guide the lightning, Lama Dorje, you summoned it. You built an altar of science and called it a miracle," replied Sherlock Holmes. The transformation was instantaneous and terrible. The cushion he sat on was knocked aside as Lama Dorje surged to his feet, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. The mask of piety did not so much slip as shatter into 1,000 pieces, his face contorting with a fury that was entirely, terrifyingly human. The serene monk was gone, and in his place stood a cornered killer. A strangled, guttural sound, raw with pure, unadulterated rage, tore from his lips. "You," answered Lama Dorje. The silence that followed Holmes's accusation was of a quality I had seldom experienced, a profound vacuum that seemed to draw the very air from one's lungs. It swallowed all sound, the faint, flickering whisper of the butter lamps, the distant, keening lament of the wind against the high passes. Lama Dorje stood perfectly still. The pious mask he had worn so long not merely dropped, but shattered into 1,000 invisible fragments. Beside him, Khempo Rinpoche remained utterly still, a figure of profound contemplation upon his low cushion, his eyes closed as if in prayer. A heavy scroll, suddenly nerveless in Dorje's grasp, slipped from his fingers. Its dry, rattling unravelling across the floorboards was a sound of shocking profanity in that hallowed cavern of knowledge. Then, to my profound astonishment, a slow smile began to transform Lama Dorje's features. It was a dreadful sight, a smile utterly devoid of mirth, yet filled with an immense and chilling satisfaction. The look of a chess master who sees the final fatal move upon the board. He raised his head, his gaze bypassing his spiritual superior entirely to fix itself with an unnerving intensity directly upon my friend. His voice, when it came, was utterly transformed. Gone was the humble, deferential cleric. In his place stood an intellect of cold, diamond-hard brilliance, honed to a razor's edge in the monastery's isolation. Sigerson, I knew from the moment you questioned the purity of the abbot's drinking water that you were no mere pilgrim. Only a mind such as yours could perceive the grand design behind the veil of superstition, responded Lama Dorje. He took a deliberate step forward, his saffron robes whispering against the dusty floor. He gestured around the vast library, a grand, theatrical sweep of his arm that encompassed the ancient, slumbering texts and scrolls that lined its walls. This place has slumbered for 1,000 years, content with chants and superstition, while the world outside hurtled forward on wheels of iron and currents of invisible fire. Our late abbot was the chief guardian of that slumber. He saw knowledge as a poison and progress as a sin, replied Lama Dorje. Holmes's voice was low and preternaturally even, the verbal equivalent of a surgeon's scalpel probing for a final, malignant truth. And you saw the disgraced European surveyor not as a heretic, but as a teacher. His books on engineering, on Volta and Faraday, became your new scripture, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Dorje's smile widened into a triumphant grin. He clasped his hands behind his back and began to pace, his soft-soled boots making no sound upon the ancient wood. I felt a chill creep up my spine. This was not the confession of a penitent criminal, but the proud, unholy lecture of a professor of damnation. Precisely. He taught me that lightning was not the wrath of a god, but a simple discharge of natural force, a force that could be understood, predicted, and guided. The abbot wished to keep us in the Dark Ages. I chose to give him a truly divine judgment, delivered by the very laws of nature he refused to comprehend, answered Lama Dorje. His arrogance was breathtaking, a chilling spectacle. He spoke not of murder, but of enlightenment, a terrible and twisted parody of the monastery's most sacred teachings. I found myself recoiling, not from a common murderer, but from a philosophy so cold and alien it seemed to freeze the very soul. You call it a crime. I call it a necessary catalyst for evolution. To remove a corrupt and ignorant leader for the betterment of all, is that not the highest good? He built his cell of solid granite to protect himself from a knife in the dark, never imagining the threat could come from the sky itself. A beautiful irony, do you not think? Said Lama Dorje. He stopped his pacing directly before my friend, his expression one of mutual, almost fraternal respect, as if he saw in Holmes not an accuser, but a reflection of his own brilliance. I do not confess to you as a penitent to a priest, Sigerson. I speak to you as the only man in this hemisphere who could possibly appreciate the artistry of my work. The finely woven copper filament within the prayer rope, the metallic salts infused into the beads to increase their conductivity, the precise placement of the iron staff upon the roof. It was a symphony of physics, a prayer answered by science. Lama Dorje answered. With his confession complete, a strange, almost beatific calm settled over Lama Dorje. He had unburdened himself not of guilt, but of the crushing solitude of his own genius. He stood proudly, awaiting a verdict from a jury of one whom he considered his only peer.
But Holmes, his face an unreadable mask, remained silent. My gaze and his shifted to the still figure of Khempo Rinpoche. The old Lama's eyes had finally opened. They held not the fire of anger, but a profound and ancient sorrow, and within their fathomless depths lay the terrible, immutable weight of the judgment that must now be passed. The great Himalayan storm had passed as if it had never been. From the secluded stone balcony adjoining Khempo Rinpoche's chambers, the world seemed newly forged. Water dripped with a steady, rhythmic patter from the eaves of the monastery roof, each drop a tiny percussion in the immense silence of the valley. The air, scrubbed clean and sharp, carried the scent of wet stone and distant pine. Below us, the clouds had become a white sea, and the first hint of dawn was touching the highest peaks with a delicate, rose-colored fire. My friend, known to this community simply as Sigerson, stood beside the ancient Lama, his gaze fixed on the unfolding spectacle. Lama Dorje's arrogant confession lingered in the air between us, a puzzle of logic and ambition now solved, yet leaving behind an even greater question of justice. It was Khempo Rinpoche who finally broke the contemplative quiet, his voice a low and resonant sound, like stones shifting at the bottom of a river. To expose his cleverness would be to celebrate it. The iron prayer must remain an act of heaven, not an act of man, Khempo Rinpoche answered. And the man himself? A murderer cannot be permitted to simply continue amongst you. The truth demands its own form of reckoning, Sherlock Holmes noted. Truth has many faces, Sigerson. The truth of your wires and batteries is for the mind. But the truth of faith is for the soul of a community. To tell our monks that their abbot was killed not by divine will, but by a cunning trick, it would unravel the very fabric of their devotion. We would be trading one poison for another, said Khempo Rinpoche. As he spoke, the sound of soft-soled boots on stone announced the arrival of others. 2 stoic monks emerged from the shadows of the doorway, and between them walked Lama Dorje. He was not bound, nor did he appear defeated. His head was held high, his expression one of cold intellectual pride. His eyes met Holmes's for a fleeting moment, and in them I saw not remorse, but the silent acknowledgment of a master gamesman for the opponent who had bested him. No word was spoken. Khempo Rinpoche gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The monks turned, and with Dorje between them, they walked towards the outer gate. The rhythmic scuff of their boots on the granite path grew fainter and fainter, until it was swallowed entirely by the vastness of the morning. Lama Dorje was walking into exile, his genius forever silenced by the mountains, his crime a secret kept to preserve a sacred story. When the sound was gone, a single deep-throated bell began to toll from the heart of the monastery, calling the faithful to their morning prayers. The sun had now climbed above the jagged horizon, flooding the valley with golden light. Holmes drew a slow, deep breath. You have administered a justice that the Old Bailey could never conceive. Not a punishment to fit the crime, but a remedy to heal the wound it left upon your world, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He sought to command the heavens with his knowledge. Now he will have nothing but the heavens for company.
It is a fitting sentence. His failure was not of the mind, but of the spirit, responded Khempo Rinpoche. My friend turned from the vista and looked at the old master, a rare expression of profound understanding on his sharp features. He had arrived in these mountains seeking knowledge, and had found it not in a laboratory or a textbook, but here, on a storm-washed balcony at the edge of the world. He had solved the mystery of the iron prayer, only to discover a far deeper truth about the delicate balance between what is known and what must be believed.